Hello, everybody. This is Philip Martin, and welcome to On Film on Video for July 9th. And I hope we had the date right in the opening, because I messed up last week and actually put the date that I recorded this on rather than the date that it hit the airways. Some of you probably didn't even notice, and nobody said anything about it, so we got away with one. Anyway, welcome to my Tuesday morning. It's one of the things we like to do, or we try to do with these videos, is to give you a little bit of a sense of what it's like to put together this section. And as of Tuesday morning, I know one thing that's going in the section, and that is that we've got a Black Widow review coming. And I've been looking, of all the MCU movies, this is the one I'm really looking forward to. I'm not, as anybody who's paid attention to this can vouch for, a huge comic book movie fan. I'm not a huge Marvel fan. I've liked some of them. Most of the time I like them up until the time that they have to save the world and there's this huge, tumult and stuff like that. But I'm fascinated with the idea of Scarlett Johansson executive produced movie about Black Widow starring Scarlett and Florence Pugh and David Harbour. I like the trailers. I think it's going to be fun. I expect to watch it opening weekend, if not before, if I get a screener, which I probably will. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie, but it's sort of running everything else away from the box office. We do have another film that's opening that I know of called The Loneliest Whale, a documentary. And at this point, we've tried to get a screener of it. Sean Clancy was actually down to do the review. I don't know if Sean's going to have time. I hope that he can, but we'll see. But we'll cover that too. And the other big thing this week is my class starts. So on Thursday mornings, so yesterday morning, I was down at Riverdale with about 100 people, mostly retired folks, as part of the LifeQuest program of continuing adult education, showing old movies. And I'm not sure exactly now. I've got a list of movies that I'm going to show this month, because it's only going to go this month. But I'm thinking about, Michael Mann's Thief from 1981 is one I'm really considering. My Daughter Clementine, the John Ford Henry Fonda Western from 1948 I'm considering. I'm definitely going to show The Gunfighter, the Gregory Peck movie from 1950. It's another Western. And I want to show at least that in one other Western. And it might be Red River, which I just wrote about. I might show Red River. I might show My Darling Clementine. I don't think I would have time to show The Searchers. But, yeah, some mixture of that. And I think I'm going to show Don't Look Now, the Donald Sutherland movie from 1970, Nicholas Roeg movie, actually. It's really wonderful. And I'm really looking forward. And one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to it, unlike most times, I'm not a person who rewatches movies a lot. Like, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and you interrogate me, haul me off, there's probably only a handful of movies I've watched more than 3 or 4 times in my life, on purpose. And most movies I don't ever watch again. I'll watch one, even if I enjoy them. Something like The Constant Gardener. Why would I ever watch that again? I mean, it's a fine film, and I can remember a lot about it, But usually, unless it's a question of, like, I want my wife Karen to see this, or I'm presenting it to a group, I'm not going to watch a movie again. Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is one of my favorite films of all time, I've probably watched that 3 times, and the first time I watched it for myself, and I understood it, got it, and the next 2 times I showed it in context of showing it to a class. Same thing with, Killer Sheep, same thing with, most movies I don't see more than once, and that's just me. One of the reasons is because I have a lot of movies to watch all the time, and I'm watching them in a different way than your average consumer. I'm not just watching them for my own self-gratification. I'm not watching them for, to kill some time. I'm watching them, for professional reasons. And even when I am relaxing and don't have any obligations, I kind of feel like I ought to be pushing ahead and building up and watching something new, if it's at all possible. Same reason I don't watch reruns of The Wire, which I love. Yeah. But anyway, just to put this in context, but for the last couple of months, tail end of the pandemic, if we are at the tail end of the pandemic, which who knows? I mean, I'm not, I'm going out, I'm double vaxxed, I'm fine, but who knows? We started kind of in preparation for this class, watching old movies again. I've got right over my head here, you can see that's not nearly the collection, but those are mostly Criterion collection films that I've just kept out in their cases. Usually after a couple of years, what usually happens is I throw the cases away and I put the disc in bins, and I've got those in the other room, and so there's way more than that around here, but that's what I'm sort of like, that's kind of the library I use to, for presentations for films I'm going to show to classes and talk about. So for the past couple of months, we've been going through these, and sort of like there's a lot of films that I would like to revisit at some point, like Mike Leigh's Naked, which is an important film to me, not necessarily because it's that important a film, though I would make a big argument for it being a very good film, but because of, personal reasons. I saw it on New Year's Day in New York in 1990, I think it was 1994, New Year's Day in New York, and it was a really interesting day we had, and, it's part of that, so it brings back these memories, and someday I will show this to my class, but we started out a couple of months ago, and we watched Bullitt, and the reason we watched Bullitt was because, Karen hadn't seen Bullitt ever, I don't think, and, we're both kind of car people, and I really wanted to see if it would hold up, if it would really kind of, if I could enjoy it again. And the funny thing was I actually did. And I mean, there's some stuff that you have to get past and you're watching an older movie, especially if you're used to the really super high fidelity that we have now. The films look different than they used to, but some of us can even prefer those old looks. I mean, sort of like there's some scenes in Bullitt that I just love, and they look like, TV detective movie stuff from the 70s or something, but it's still got a great look to it. It feels good and it holds up. So we went and we started really concentrating on movies from that time period and earlier. Most of these I've written about in the newspaper at some point, like The Gunfighter, the Gregory Peck movie, and My Darling Clementine, which I don't think I did write about, but maybe I will. I think I might have written about Wyatt Earp, and the whole thing. The reason that we think Wyatt Earp is this big deal is because Wyatt Earp lived long enough to go to the studios and hang around and talk to people like John Ford and tell him about his exploits and then the gunfight in My Darling Clementine, the gunfight at the OK Corral, which it wasn't even called that until a couple movies later, is supposedly exactly how Wyatt Earp laid it out to John Ford. He said that we did this, we went here, I did that, So, and even though it's really historically an accurate movie, which is one of the reasons I think I'm going to show it, just because it's terrible history. It's just not even close. But it's still kind of it's an interesting bridge film, and it's fun to watch Henry Fonda play this kind of nerdy character as Wyatt Earp. But anyway, we went there, and then we saw a French film, went back and looked at the French film Le Samouraï, which, again, is it's a little arch, and the fidelity of the print is, there's a limitation to it. It's not as beautiful as it probably was when it was in theaters in 1968 or whatever, but it's still really good. The Criterion people do a really good job of restoring these things and putting them in context. Then we went to, what did we go to? Well, what I want to talk about is the movie that we saw just this last weekend, which was Midnight Cowboy, John Schlesinger's Midnight Cowboy. And I've seen Midnight Cowboy a number of times. I don't know that I saw it in theaters. It was X-rated, and it's 68? And, that's probably not something I saw. I remember the ads for it, and I remember watching it as soon as I had a chance to. And I don't know that I ever saw it in a theater. I mean, if you think about it, so my experience is that movies were in theaters, and then they were in theaters a little longer, and then they went to TV a couple of years later, and that's where they hung out until cable came around, and then maybe you could see the whole thing uncut, unexpurgated on cable, which is one of the reasons that I'm kind of, I'm really fond of the old Playboy channel, because that was a chance. I mean, something like Midnight Cowboy could have ended up on the Playboy channel, like in 1981 or 1982, along with Caligula and the witches and things like that, because and you would have had a chance to see them there. In fact, I did a whole bunch of I taped a lot of things off the Playboy channel back in the day. That was one of the ways I built my film collection. And I kind of wish I still had some of those old VHS tapes, because if nothing else, I think Videodrome for the first time, this is weird, because Videodrome, came out in like 1983, David Cronenberg film with Deborah Harry and James Woods. But I think I saw that the first time either on the Playboy channel or Cinemax, probably not HBO. And that era just is really fascinating to me, because what you could do, we didn't have the DVRs yet, and it wasn't streaming yet, so you didn't have, video on demand, but you did if you had your VCR, and you could set the timer, and you could record the movie that came on at 2 in the morning, and then you would have it, and you would show it anytime you wanted. But you got a lot of serendipitous things happen there, because sometimes it would not record the right channel, sometimes it would not start exactly on time, sometimes the schedule would change. It was an interesting time. But anyway, somehow I managed to see Midnight Cowboy before I was, like 20 years old or something. And it was in part of my arsenal. It was one of those films that I thought I knew. And I hadn't watched it again since the 80s, maybe. I don't know. I did remember the final, the scene in Florida, which, spoiler alert, I won't spoil it, but it ends in Florida. And I didn't really remember, and I remembered some of the iconic stuff, that I'm walking here and that, but I didn't really, if you'd asked me to tell you the plot of it, I could have, muddled through, but I wouldn't have, hit these little fine things, The John MacGyver character was one that I didn't quite remember, or more likely, I didn't quite get what he was doing in the movie the first time. And this time I did. And I also kind of thought of Midnight Cowboy as one of those movies that didn't play well, that didn't age all that well, because they did have that the Warhol type party scene in it, and I expected that to be corny, and I expected that to be, kind of over the top and sort of. And it really wasn't. It's really a well-controlled film. Schlesinger, Voight, and Hoffman. The acting is a little bit loud for me. But when you consider who these characters are, I think it's appropriate. I think especially Ratso Rizzo, Hoffman's performance as Ratso, which really, if you watch that, it's the same character as Rain Man in a way. And just think about that when you watch it. Voight is one of those. He's so bad he's good because he's, playing a character in that character. We really never get down to the meat of Joe Buck because he's too vulnerable. He's not going to let us in that far. So Joe Buck himself is playing kind of this corny character. And Joe Buck is not a very good actor. And I think that's sort of the key to that character. It's that in the end, when he takes off the cowboy clothes and he throws them away when he gets to Florida, I think that's the only time we ever get close to the real Joe Buck and the mystery of who he was before he adopted the cowboy persona is sort of interesting. I would like to think a little bit more about that. But the scenes, the famous, well, I guess the whole movie's famous, but the scenes, the rape scene in Midnight Cowboy is kind of tough. It's really, it's not the sort of movie that you expect to hold up in the way it has. Now, it is not as modern feeling as, say, The Last Picture Show, which I showed my class, I don't know, years ago. I mean, the last time I did this. And The Last Picture Show is a very interesting movie because it really does feel like something someone could shoot today. All the acting is on this really nice naturalistic key, and it's not as hyperbolic as a lot of films of that era were. And it also has that nice tie-in with Red River, because that's the picture that plays. That is The Last Picture Show is Red River. That's the last movie that plays in that little town in The Last Picture Show. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking about now. So we're going to, what we have, and we are the lucky humans that get to experience this because, up until 100 years ago, we didn't have any way of arresting the past and holding on to it. We couldn't really record. I mean, yes, you could in the but really since the 1920s or so, that's when we've had a certain quality of, film and, audio recording that we can actually relate to people of 100 years ago. I mean, we can watch people from 100 years ago walk around and talk and act more or less the way they would act in their day, in their time when we were there, more or less self-consciously. Not completely self-consciously, because even as I'm doing this, I'm conscious of myself stopping and pausing and umming and misspeaking words and going too fast. So I am performing in a way that I wouldn't be if we were sitting here talking. If we were just sitting here talking, it wasn't a camera there, it was just you guys, it would be a different experience. But we've got this filter between us, so therefore it changes this side. And changes that side too. But that's one of the things that when you talk about movies, because it's not like watching a play, and it's not like, watching real life for sure, because you're watching real life now, because this isn't scripted and everything, but I'm conscious of being watched. So that changes it. Anyway, we didn't have candid surveillance footage like in the 1920s. But if we did have it, boy, it would be fascinating. And as the motion pictures, as movies have grown up, one of the ways they've grown up is that they became more conscious of that difference between what they were and what we are. And they tried to bridge that difference. And if you watch Montgomery Clift in Red River, and he's a method actor, he's from the Actors Studio, studied with Lee Strasberg, and you watch how subtle and calm and even that performance is, and contrast it to the other famous method actor, Jimmy Dean, James Dean from Rebel Without a Cause, a few years later. And that Rebel Without a Cause performance is often given a lot of weight, and it should be. I mean, it's like, all the kids are too old to be playing teenagers, but never mind. But it recognizes there's this emotional component to life and this angst and all this, but it is a little over the top. But Jimmy scorches up his face, and he can't, But you don't see any of that with Montgomery Clift in Red River, so it's really interesting because you're just like, I always wondered, like, why didn't James Dean look at Red River and go, okay, I can pull this back a little bit, or somebody could tell him to pull it back a little bit. Nicholas Roeg could tell him to pull it back a bit, but didn't. And we have the same sort of things today. We do have people who really like to choose scenery, and sometimes they can do it in effective ways. And we have other actors who have much cooler styles, and we have movies that really do a good job of mimicking real life. But is that what the movie's for? I don't know. I mean, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes you want these realistic stories about things that could actually happen, and sometimes you want Black Widow. And that's a matter of taste, matter of what you're in the mood for, and it's part of the puzzle of putting all this stuff together. So, anyway, I've got to get back to it because I've got to hear from my guys to find out what we're going to put in this week's section. But I just wanted to give you some, thoughts about what's going on. It's like all these movies live like in the now. You can go get them and you can go back and venture into 1950, which is replicating 1860. I mean, you can get that 1950 idea of the Old West anytime you want. You can go get The Searchers, you can go get all these great movies, and that's fascinating and real. And you're lucky because you're not me, who has to always be kind of swimming forward like that shark and consuming the next big thing. You can do what you want. So do it. We'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye.